My family laughed at me at my brother's wedding, making jokes about how I was the only Carter who couldn't afford a decent dress or hold down a real job. I sat at the back table with distant relatives, watching my brother David marry his fiancée Sarah, surrounded by family members who treated me like the black sheep who'd never amounted to anything. Until Sarah walked over during the reception, stopped in front of me, bowed deeply, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "General Carter, ma'am, it's an honor. My name is Lieutenant Colonel Jessica Carter, and for 8 years, before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I let my family believe I was a failure instead of one of the most decorated combat commanders in the United States Army. The Carter family has always been about visible success and measurable achievement. We're a family of professionals who value stability, respectability, and the kind of accomplishments you can display on office walls. My father, Dr. Robert Carter, is a renowned cardiologist who built a practice that spans 3 hospitals. My mother, Patricia Carter, is a successful real estate broker who's closed millions in property deals. My older sister Michelle became a federal prosecutor before turning 35, now handling high-profile white-collar crime cases that make national news. My younger brother David, whose wedding we were celebrating, had just made partner at his prestigious law firm after graduating summa cum laude from Harvard Law. Even my cousins had impressive careers. One's a neurosurgeon, another runs a tech startup that just went public, and the third anchors the evening news for a major network. The Carter family photo looks like a collection of professional headshots, everyone polished and successful in ways that translate to cocktail party conversations. Then there's me, the family's cautionary tale, the one who supposedly couldn't figure out her life. According to family mythology, I'm Jessica Carter, the disappointment who never lived up to her potential. The official story is simple and devastating. I graduated college with mediocre grades and no clear direction. I bounced between odd jobs for several years, never settling into anything substantial. Eventually, I landed what everyone assumed was some low-level government position that barely paid enough to cover my basic expenses. At family gatherings, I'm introduced with barely concealed shame. This is Jessica, our middle daughter. She works for, well, it's some government thing. Nothing too impressive. The pause before nothing too impressive always carries the weight of parental disappointment. My relatives have learned to navigate conversations about me carefully. While they enthusiastically discuss Michelle's latest courtroom victory or David's legal achievements, discussions about my career are brief and awkward. "Jessica's doing okay," they'll say with forced smiles, then quickly pivot to someone else's success story. My apartment is modest, my car is older, and my wardrobe consists mainly of practical clothes rather than designer pieces. At today's wedding, I sat with the distant relatives and family friends because the main family tables were reserved for people with real careers and spouses worth showcasing. The disappointment in my parents' eyes has become a familiar weight. They sacrifice so much to give their children opportunities, working extra hours and making personal sacrifices to fund our educations. Seeing their investment in me apparently yield so little return has been a source of quiet grief that permeates every family interaction. My siblings try to be kind, but there's an underlying condescension in their concern. They offer to help me network or find better opportunities, not understanding that my current situation is exactly where I need to be for reasons I can never explain. The truth is, for 8 years, I've maintained this carefully constructed persona because revealing my actual military career would compromise operations so classified that discussing them would constitute high treason. While my family sees failure, I've been serving my country in combat zones they'll never know existed, leading missions that have saved countless American lives. But today, at David's wedding, that meticulously maintained fiction is about to be destroyed completely. Because when someone who knows your real identity appears unexpectedly, all the careful lies in the world can't protect you from the truth. The encrypted satellite phone had been silent for 6 months, tucked away in a hidden compartment of my purse like a dormant weapon. I'd begun to hope that my extended leave would become permanent, that I could finally try to build some semblance of a normal life with my family. Then, at 3:47 p.m. during David's wedding reception, it buzzed with the tone that meant American soldiers were in mortal danger. I stepped away from the celebration, moving toward the hotel's service corridor as discreetly as possible. The caller ID showed only numbers I recognized as coming from Central Command. Colonel Carter, the voice, belonged to General Patricia Hayes, my commanding officer. We have a code red situation developing in Syria. Multiple American units have been ambushed and are requesting immediate tactical extraction coordination from someone with your specific operational experience. My blood went cold as I processed the implications. I glanced back at the reception, where my family was celebrating David's new marriage, completely unaware that their failure sister was about to coordinate a mission that could save dozens of American lives. "What's our immediate status?" I asked, automatically slipping into the command voice I'd kept buried for months. 3 separate units pinned down by coordinated enemy forces in urban terrain. Heavy casualties reported. The tactical situation requires someone with your specific expertise in urban combat extraction. We have soldiers requesting immediate support from the Ghost Commander. I felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle on my shoulders. The Ghost Commander, a nickname I'd earned during 7 deployments for my ability to extract units from impossible situations without leaving evidence of American involvement. Timeframe? Extraction window closes in 4 hours. After that, we lose the cover of darkness and the missions become suicide runs. Colonel, these soldiers specifically requested you by reputation. They know your extraction protocols could be the difference between coming home and coming home in boxes. I watched through the corridor window as my family danced and celebrated, my brother David spinning his new wife Sarah across the dance floor. They looked so happy, so blissfully unaware that wars were being fought by people they'd never meet to protect the freedom they took for granted. "Ma'am, there's another complication," General Hayes continued. "The Syrian situation has potential to escalate into international incident if the extractions go wrong. We need someone who can coordinate multiple simultaneous operations without leaving any diplomatic footprints." I closed my eyes, feeling the pull of duty warring with my desperate desire to stay at this wedding, to pretend I was just Jessica Carter, the family disappointment who worked some boring government job. "Where do you need me?" "Helicopter extraction in 30 minutes. We're setting up a mobile command center at Ramstein Air Base. You'll be coordinating 3 simultaneous extraction operations across hostile territory." I looked back at the reception one more time. My father was giving a toast about family legacy and David's bright future. My mother was crying tears of joy. My sister Michelle was recording everything on her phone, capturing memories of what she believed was just another family celebration. "Understood, General." Initiating extraction protocol. I ended the call and stared at my reflection in the corridor window. In 30 minutes, I'd have to leave my brother's wedding reception without explanation, disappearing into a helicopter, while my family assumed I was just stepping out for air or making excuses to leave early like the antisocial relative they thought I was. But 3 American units were counting on the Ghost Commander to bring them home alive. The family disappointment was about to become responsible for one of the most complex extraction operations in recent military history. I straightened my modest dress, checked my watch, and prepared to vanish from my brother's wedding to save soldiers my family would never know existed. Ramstein Air Base at 9:15 p.m. operated like a city that never sleeps, but with the focused intensity of a machine processing global military operations in real time. Security checkpoints that normally handled thousands of daily personnel stood at heightened alert, manned by guards whose expressions sharpened when they saw my ultra-black clearance, the kind of access that granted entry to rooms most Air Force personnel didn't know existed. I passed through 8 increasingly secure checkpoints, each one granting access to deeper levels of classified operations. My footsteps echoed through corridors lined with reinforced blast doors, each hiding command centers that could coordinate military responses across multiple continents simultaneously. The helicopter ride from David's wedding had taken 2 hours. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story, during which I changed from my modest reception dress into full tactical gear. My family's confused faces as I quietly slipped away were burned into my memory. My mother asking if I was feeling all right, my father barely looking up from his conversation, my siblings assuming I was just being antisocial as usual. The Strategic Operations Center occupied 2 entire classified floors. its existence omitted from all public-based documentation. Here, in rooms that appeared on no official building schematics, America's most elite military commanders coordinated operations that could reshape global stability within hours. When I entered the main command center, controlled chaos greeted me like a familiar battlefield rhythm. Dozens of uniformed officers and classified contractors worked at terminals, displaying real-time intelligence from every combat zone worldwide. Satellite feeds, communication intercepts, troop movements, and casualty reports flowed in constant streams that trained analysts converted into actionable military strategy. 4 massive screens dominated the front wall, displaying detailed maps of Syria with red markers indicating the 3 separate ambush sites. Live drone footage showed the desperate tactical situation: American units pinned down in urban terrain, enemy forces closing in, and extraction windows rapidly disappearing. Colonel Carter, Major Williams, my former operations coordinator, greeted me with obvious relief. "We've confirmed 3 separate units under heavy fire in Damascus, Aleppo, and Homs. Each unit is requesting immediate extraction using Ghost Commander protocols." I studied the tactical displays, my mind automatically processing combat scenarios and extraction possibilities. 6 months away from active duty hadn't dulled my operational capabilities. If anything, the forced break had given me fresh perspective on urban warfare tactics. Current casualty status: 12 KIA, 37 wounded across all 3 sites. But Colonel, the enemy forces are using coordination patterns that suggest state-sponsored support. This isn't random insurgent activity. This is strategic warfare designed to trap American forces in kill zones. A chill ran through me as I realized the tactical sophistication of the attacks. Someone had studied American extraction procedures and designed these ambushes specifically to counter our standard response protocols. What's our available assets? Limited. 3 extraction teams positioned outside each city, but they need strategic coordination to avoid turning rescue operations into additional casualty events. The enemy is using communication intercepts and predictable deployment schedules against us. I moved to my command terminal, surprised to find my access codes still active after 6 months of leave. General Hayes appeared beside me as screens came alive with classified intelligence streams. "Colonel, I know this reactivation interrupts your family time, but you developed the urban extraction protocols these enemy forces are trying to counter. You created the tactical approaches that could save these soldiers, and you trained most of the team leaders who'll be executing the missions." The weight of command authority settled on my shoulders like body armor I'd never really removed. In this room, I wasn't Jessica Carter, the family disappointment who couldn't hold down a real job. I was Lieutenant Colonel Carter, the Ghost Commander, architect of urban extraction tactics, and the person responsible for bringing American soldiers home alive from impossible situations. Status of communications security? Compromised. Enemy forces are monitoring standard military frequencies and predicting our movements. We need extraction approaches they've never encountered. I accessed tactical databases I'd developed during 7 combat deployments, systems so classified that viewing them required biometric confirmation from my specific clearance level. My family thought they were watching a failure slip away from a wedding reception. They had no idea they were witnessing the return of one of America's most effective combat commanders. 7 hours into the extraction coordination, the secure elevator doors opened with their distinctive chime, and I heard a voice that made my heart stop mid-beat. "I need to speak with the Ghost Commander immediately. We have a situation that requires her personal authorization for cross-border tactical support." I turned from my command terminal to see a familiar figure in army dress uniform striding across the operations center floor. Captain Sarah Bennett, a combat medic I'd served with during my 3rd deployment to Afghanistan. Behind her, looking completely overwhelmed and out of place among the classified terminals and global military feeds, walked my new sister-in-law Sarah, David's wife, from the wedding I'd left just hours ago. Sarah's eyes swept the Strategic Operations Center with obvious amazement. Rows of ultra-black clearance workstations, wall-mounted screens displaying real-time intelligence from every American combat zone, uniformed personnel moving with the urgent precision of people managing life-or-death situations worldwide. This was her first glimpse into America's true military nerve center, and I watched her struggle to comprehend the scope of operations she was witnessing. The Ghost Commander is currently coordinating multi-theater extraction protocols. Major Williams intercepted them professionally. I can arrange a briefing with… Major, with all due respect, Captain Bennett interrupted. We have wounded soldiers requesting immediate medical evacuation using protocols only she can authorize. I need tactical oversight from the Ghost Commander, and I need it now. I stood slowly, knowing that the moment I turned around, 8 years of carefully maintained separation would collapse completely. For nearly a decade, I'd managed to keep my two worlds apart through meticulous operational security and family deception. Captain Bennett, I said, my voice carrying the authority that comes with commanding soldiers in combat zones. I understand we have wounded personnel requiring immediate evacuation protocols. Both women turned toward me, and I watched recognition hit Captain Bennett like a physical shock. Her professional military bearing cracked, as her expression shifted from urgent briefing mode to complete disbelief, then to something approaching reverence. "Holy hell," she whispered, staring at me like I'd materialized from military legend. "Jessica Carter, you're the Ghost Commander." Sarah's head snapped between us, confusion and growing alarm written across her face. "Ghost Commander? Captain, how do you know my sister-in-law?" Captain Bennett continued staring, her voice barely controlled with respect. "Know her, Sarah? Your sister-in-law revolutionized American urban combat operations. The Ghost Commander, the invisible leader who pioneered extraction tactics that have saved thousands of American soldiers." "That's impossible," Sarah said, but her voice wavered with uncertainty. "Jessica works some boring government job. She couldn't even afford a decent dress for our wedding. She's the family disappointment." I watched my new sister-in-law's worldview begin to fracture as Captain Bennett shook her head slowly, respectfully. "Sarah, your sister-in-law didn't fail at anything. She's been serving in the most classified combat position in American military history. Every urban warfare tactic you've heard about, every impossible extraction that made the news, she designed them." The command center had gone noticeably quieter around us, dozens of personnel pretending they weren't witnessing a family revelation with serious national security implications. Sarah stared at me with growing horror and comprehension. "The government job story." "Operational cover," I said simply. "I've been a lieutenant colonel for 6 years, Sarah. Before that, I spent 4 years developing the combat tactics that keep American soldiers alive in hostile urban environments." Captain Bennett stepped forward, her voice filled with the kind of respect I'd never heard directed toward me by anyone in my family. "Ma'am, I've executed missions you designed. I've got soldiers alive today because of extraction protocols you created. It's an honor to finally meet the Ghost Commander face to face." Sarah looked like someone had just explained that gravity worked in reverse. But the family thinks, everyone thinks you're failing at life." "I let them believe that," I said quietly, "because the alternative was revealing military secrets that could get American soldiers killed, including the ones I'm trying to save right now." The alarm that cut through the Strategic Operations Center wasn't the standard alert. It was the tone reserved for imminent American casualties. Sarah jumped at the sharp, urgent sound, but I was already moving toward the main tactical display before the intelligence officer could speak. "Colonel Carter, we've intercepted enemy communications indicating they're moving to execute the trapped American units within 15 minutes, Major Williams reported, his voice tight with urgency. "They know our standard extraction protocols and have positioned forces to counter every approach we've attempted." Sarah stared at the screens, showing real-time footage of American soldiers pinned down in 3 separate Syrian cities, her face draining of color as she processed the scope of what was unfolding. "How is that possible? How can they predict military operations?" I studied the intelligence feeds, my mind processing tactical data points that others would miss. 8 years of urban combat experience kicked in as I analyzed enemy positioning patterns, communication intercepts, and terrain advantages with the speed that had made me legendary in special operations circles. "They're not just predicting our operations," I said grimly. "They're using our own doctrine against us. Every extraction protocol we have for urban combat, they've studied and prepared to exploit." I moved to my command terminal and began accessing systems that made Captain Bennett step back involuntarily. My fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up tactical databases so classified that viewing them without proper authorization carried automatic court-martial charges. Major Williams, bring up Operation Urban Ghost on Screen 6, I ordered. Cross-reference with all enemy movement patterns from the past 12 hours. Ma'am, those files require Ghost Commander clearance. I am the Ghost Commander, Major. Execute the order immediately. As classified data cascaded across multiple screens, patterns emerged that painted a terrifying picture. The enemy forces hadn't just planned random ambushes. They had systematically studied American urban warfare tactics and designed their attacks to maximize casualties while minimizing our ability to respond effectively. There, I pointed to a series of connections others had overlooked. Enemy positioning from 6 hours ago, communication patterns from 4 hours ago, and tactical movements from 2 hours ago. They know exactly how we'll respond to each situation, and they've prepared kill zones designed to eliminate our extraction teams. Sarah watched me work with growing amazement, seeing analytical capabilities she'd never imagined her disappointing sister-in-law possessed. But there wasn't time for family revelations. Dozens of American soldiers were about to become casualties unless we completely reimagined our approach. Captain Bennett, I said, my voice carrying absolute authority, I need you to immediately recall all standard extraction teams while I redesign the entire operational approach to these rescues. Ma'am, with respect, Central Command has already approved our extraction strategies. Central Command doesn't have access to the tactical intelligence I'm analyzing right now, I cut her off. Our extraction teams are walking into a coordinated trap that will result in massive American casualties unless we completely restructure these operations. I turned to the main tactical display, calling up Syrian city maps and urban warfare scenarios. My hands moved with practiced precision, redesigning extraction tactics, communication protocols, and approach vectors in real time. New operational parameters. Instead of standard extraction approaches, we implement coordinated urban disruption. Team Alpha creates false communication traffic using deception protocols I developed in 2018. Team Bravo uses underground approach routes that don't appear in any enemy intelligence files. Team Charlie provides electronic warfare support from positions they've never encountered. I continued for 50 minutes, completely restructuring 3 simultaneous urban extractions while Sarah watched in stunned silence. This wasn't theoretical knowledge. This was practical expertise born from 8 years of designing operations that brought American soldiers home alive from impossible situations. The enemy expects predictable American responses because they've studied our standard doctrine, I explained, adjusting final tactical details. Instead, we use modified urban warfare tactics they've never seen, turning their intelligence advantage into our operational superiority. When I finished, Captain Bennett stared at the revised operation plan with obvious respect. Ma'am, this is brilliant. You've transformed their coordinated ambushes into our extraction victory. Sarah looked at me like she was seeing a complete stranger. How do you just redesign an entire military operation from memory? I met her eyes directly. Because I've been doing this every day for 8 years, Sarah. While you thought I was failing at life, I was designing the tactics that kept American soldiers like these alive in combat zones around the world. After Captain Bennett left to coordinate the revised extraction operations, Sarah and I found ourselves alone in my private briefing room, adjacent to the Strategic Operations Center. She sat across from my desk, staring at classified documents bearing my signature, my tactical analyses, my handwritten notes on decisions that had shaped American urban warfare for nearly a decade. I need to understand something, she said finally, her voice small and confused. If you've been all these years, why did you let your family believe you were failing at life? Why did you let David think his sister was a disappointment? I looked at my new sister-in-law, really looked at her, for the first time, without the careful emotional distance I'd maintained to protect operational security. She was 29 now, a pediatric nurse with a gentle heart who'd fallen in love with my brother's kindness and ambition. But sitting in my classified briefing room, she looked like someone trying to reconcile 2 completely different versions of the same person. Because the truth would have gotten people killed, I said quietly, including David. I pulled out a classified file from my secure drawer, one that even Captain Bennett lacked clearance to access. Inside were photographs, mission reports, and combat assessments from my early years in special operations. This is Operation Silent Shield, 2019. 4 years after I supposedly started bouncing between meaningless jobs, I slid a photograph across the desk. That's me with an urban combat team in Iraq, developing extraction protocols that would eventually save an entire legal aid unit from a coordinated terrorist attack. Sarah stared at the photo of a woman in full combat gear, face partially obscured by tactical equipment, but unmistakably me. Younger, harder, carrying herself with the lethal confidence of someone making life-and-death decisions in hostile territory. But your family thought, everyone thought you couldn't hold down a job. I was holding down the most dangerous job in the military, I admitted, pulling out another file, but it came with an impossible cost. I opened the folder to reveal a mission report dated June 12, 2020. Sarah leaned forward, reading the classified details of an urban combat operation in Afghanistan. I was commanding a classified extraction operation in Kabul when I received intelligence about a planned attack on a humanitarian convoy, I said, my voice steady despite the memories tearing through me like shrapnel. The convoy that David's law firm was sending to deliver legal aid supplies to Afghan refugees. Sarah's eyes widened in horror. David had never mentioned being involved in international humanitarian work, but I knew from intelligence briefings that his law firm regularly coordinated legal aid missions to conflict zones. The intelligence was solid, but acting on it would have blown my cover and compromised 6 months of infiltration work that had identified multiple terrorist cells planning attacks on American civilian workers. I had to choose. Save David's convoy or protect an operation that could prevent dozens of future attacks. I pulled out the final document, an after-action report written in my own hand, every word seared into my memory like a battle scar. I chose the mission. I let David's convoy proceed, while coordinating a shadow protection operation that kept them safe without revealing my involvement. They never knew they were being protected by armed drones and tactical teams I had positioned along their entire route. Sarah's face had gone completely white. You saved David's life while he thought you were too irresponsible to even attend family events consistently? That's when I realized I could never have both, I continued, my voice barely above a whisper. Every time I got close to any of you, I put you in danger. So I stepped back, let you all believe I was failing, because protecting you meant accepting your disappointment. I closed the files and looked directly at my sister-in-law. Every family gathering where David talked about success and ambition, I sat there knowing I'd spent months ensuring he'd live to achieve those dreams. Every time someone said I was wasting my potential, I accepted it because the alternative was explaining that your sister-in-law's job was keeping people like David alive by staying away from them. Sarah stared at me with tears in her eyes. All these years, you've been protecting him by letting him think you were a failure. It's not protection, Sarah. It's the cost of this work. Some people serve by being present, others serve by staying in the shadows, even when it breaks their heart. 4 days after the successful extraction of all 3 American units, resulting in 0 additional casualties and the rescue of 49 soldiers, Sarah returned to Ramstein with questions that had consumed her during the entire mission aftermath. I need to see everything, she said, entering my office with the determined stride of someone who'd made a decision. Every file, every operation, every piece of evidence that proves what you've actually been doing for 8 years. I hesitated. Sarah, some of this information could compromise ongoing. Could compromise what? Me? Jessica, I just watched you coordinate the rescue of American soldiers from 3 different combat zones. I think I can handle learning the truth about my own sister-in-law. I opened my ultra-black database and began accessing files, 8 years of classified operations, combat assessments, and military reports that bore my digital signature. As the documents populated across multiple screens, Sarah pulled her chair closer, studying each one with the analytical mind of a trained healthcare professional. This urban combat doctrine from 2017, she said, pointing at a classified manual, This is what they reference in all the military medical training I've attended. The Carter Protocol for Combat Casualty Extraction. Named after the family that developed it, I said quietly. Her eyes widened as understanding hit her. But in all the documentation, it says developed by Dr. Robert Carter and Military Medical Assessment Division. It credits your father with creating these protocols. I pulled up the original files, showing timestamps and digital signatures proving the protocols originated from my terminal, my analysis, my combat experience. Your father-in-law provided medical expertise on trauma response and casualty care patterns. But the core tactical architecture came from me. Sarah's face went pale as she scrolled through document after document showing the same systematic pattern. My innovations credited to my father. My combat breakthroughs published under his name. My revolutionary approaches to battlefield medicine attributed to Military Medical Assessment Division rather than their actual architect. This can't be right, she muttered, but her voice lacked conviction. Your father's the most ethical doctor I know. He wouldn't steal credit for your work. I opened another classified file, email correspondence between my father and Department of Defense publishing officials from 2018. Sarah read over my shoulder as the truth unfolded in cold, bureaucratic language. Classification requirements necessitate attributing tactical innovations to Dr. Carter rather than the actual author to maintain operational security, she read aloud. Publication under real author's name would compromise active combat operations. The emails continued, showing how my father had initially protested taking credit for work that wasn't his, but eventually agreed when told it was essential for national security and my personal safety. He was protecting you, Sarah said, but her voice sounded hollow. Initially, yes, I replied, accessing more recent files. But look at these. I showed her documents from 2021, long after the original security concerns had been resolved. My father was still accepting recognition for combat innovations I'd developed, still consulting on military medical matters, using my classified research, still building his post-retirement reputation on my invisible contributions. The Carter Doctrine for Modern Combat Medicine, Sarah read from a prestigious medical journal article. By Dr. Robert Carter, MD Jesus, Jessica. This entire article is just a summary of your classified combat medical frameworks. I pulled up the original tactical assessments I'd written, showing how my father had essentially repackaged my work for public consumption, while I remained buried under classification restrictions that prevented me from claiming authorship. Here's what really bothers me, I said, opening a file that made Sarah gasp. Last month, he submitted a proposal to the Veterans Administration for new combat trauma protocols. Look familiar? The proposal was nearly identical to a classified combat medical plan I'd submitted 7 months earlier. My father was now actively competing with me for military medical contracts, using my own innovations against me without knowing it. He doesn't even realize you're a lieutenant colonel, Sarah said, the full scope of the deception hitting her. He thinks he's outsmarting some anonymous military medical analyst. The man who thinks I'm a failure has built his entire post-retirement consulting career on combat medical work I did while he believed I was bouncing between meaningless jobs. Sarah insisted on being present when I confronted my father. She'd spent 6 days analyzing the evidence, cross-referencing publications with my classified work, documenting 8 years of systematic intellectual theft. The nurse in her demanded accountability and justice. This isn't just about family anymore, she'd said with steel in her voice. This is about medical integrity, about stolen valor, about truth. We arranged to meet Dad at his medical consulting office, where he advised hospitals and medical organizations on trauma protocols, using expertise that was fundamentally mine. Walking into that building felt like entering a shrine to my stolen legacy, every medical achievement certificate representing evidence of systematic deception. Dad looked genuinely shocked to see us together. Since Sarah had returned from what she'd told David was a medical conference, our entire family had been asking questions about her sudden interest in military medical procedures. He sat behind his mahogany desk, surrounded by awards and recognition plaques, including several honoring him as the pioneer of modern combat trauma medicine. Well, this is unexpected, he said, his voice carrying that familiar medical authority. Sarah, David mentioned you attended some kind of advanced medical training. What exactly? We know, Sarah cut him off, her voice flat and unforgiving. She placed a thick folder on the desk. We know everything you've stolen. Dad's expression shifted from confusion to mounting panic. He opened the folder with trembling hands, scanning documents that Sarah had meticulously compiled. Publication records, email correspondence, combat medical assessments showing decades of plagiarism. I don't understand what this is supposed to prove, he said, but sweat had begun forming on his forehead. It proves you've built your entire post-retirement career on Jessica's work, Sarah said bluntly. Every award on this wall, every article bearing your name, every consulting contract, all based on combat medical innovations created by the daughter you think is failing at life. Dad's face went ashen as the evidence mounted before him, page after page of undeniable proof that his reputation was built on lies. This is classified information, he said weakly. How could I access classified combat medical assessments? I spoke for the first time, my voice cold as operating room steel. Because I wrote them, Dad. Every tactical framework, every trauma protocol, every innovation you've claimed as your own medical breakthrough. I stood and walked to his wall of achievements, stopping at a plaque reading, Dr. Robert Carter, Architect of Modern Combat Medicine. This medical doctrine you're famous for, I designed it in 2018 while you thought I was bouncing between dead-end jobs. These trauma protocols, created by me while you told people I couldn't hold down meaningful employment. Dad collapsed into his chair, the weight of exposure crushing him completely. You don't understand, he said desperately. They told me it was for operational security. Publishing under your name would compromise missions. That excuse expired years ago, Sarah interrupted harshly. What's your justification for continuing to steal her work when there was no security risk? Dad looked between us, cornered. I believed I was preserving our family's contributions to military medicine. When they said Jessica's work had to stay classified, I thought someone should get credit for Carter family achievements. So you chose yourself, I said quietly. You let your daughter believe she was a failure, while building your reputation on her genius. I didn't know you were. He stopped, realization hitting him like a medical emergency. My God, Jessica, you're telling me you're a lieutenant colonel in special operations, I finished, the combat medical strategist whose work you've plagiarized, the architect of every protocol you've claimed as your innovation. Silence filled the room. Dad stared at me like seeing a stranger. All these years, he whispered, when I worried about your future, criticized your choices. You were talking to one of the most decorated combat medical officers in the United States Army, I said, the person keeping soldiers alive, including American medical personnel in combat zones. The truth hung between us, 8 years of deception finally exposed. The decision to reveal my identity publicly came after sleepless nights wrestling with 8 years of ingrained secrecy. Sarah had been relentless in her arguments. The classified operations stay buried. But your contributions to combat medicine deserve recognition. You've let your father steal valor, while hiding in shadows you created to protect everyone else. The venue was David and Sarah's first anniversary reception. 200 family members, friends, and colleagues gathered to celebrate their marriage. Dad was scheduled to give a speech about family legacy and military service, drawing on his expertise in combat medicine. I sat at the same back table where I'd been placed the year before, wearing a simple dress while everyone else looked successful and accomplished. Sarah had insisted I attend, though I'd tried to decline, knowing what was about to happen. Dad approached the microphone with confidence built on years of accepting praise for work that wasn't his. He began by displaying a slide titled, The Carter Legacy, 8 Years of Medical Innovation. Family and friends, he said, his voice carrying through the reception hall. Today I want to share how the Carter family has contributed to saving American lives through advances in combat trauma medicine. He advanced to the next slide, showing trauma protocols I'd developed in 2019. He spoke authoritatively about medical breakthroughs he'd never made, combat procedures he'd never performed, life-saving innovations he'd never conceived in actual battlefield conditions. I waited until he was 25 minutes into his presentation, explaining medical strategies to an audience that included several military families and veterans who'd benefited from those exact procedures. Then Sarah stood up from her seat at the head table. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said clearly, "but there's been a significant misattribution of medical authorship in this presentation." Complete silence fell over the reception. Dad's face went white as he recognized the challenge to his authority, though he didn't yet understand its full implications. Sarah walked across the room and stopped directly in front of me. In one fluid motion, she bowed deeply and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "General Carter, ma'am, it's an honor to finally give you the recognition you deserve." The reception hall erupted. Military guests scrambled to their feet, some saluting, others applauding, most staring in shocked recognition. Family members who'd dismissed me for years suddenly realized they'd been in the presence of someone they'd never truly seen. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sarah announced, "Lieutenant Colonel Jessica Carter, United States Army Special Operations, the Ghost Commander." I stood slowly, feeling the weight of 8 years of deception finally lifting from my shoulders. When I reached the front of the room, Dad stood frozen behind the microphone, staring at me like I was materializing from his worst nightmare. "Dr. Carter," I said formally, using his title instead of Dad, "the medical innovations you're presenting were developed under my direct command between 2016 and 2024. The combat trauma protocols, the battlefield casualty procedures, the tactical medical frameworks, all originated from classified special operations medical analysis under my signature." I turned to address the audience directly. For 8 years, classification requirements prevented me from claiming credit for medical work that required absolute secrecy. However, the doctrines being presented have been declassified for training purposes. The original architect was not Dr. Robert Carter. The reception remained silent, 200 people processing implications. The original architect was Lieutenant Colonel Jessica Carter, the woman this family believed was failing at life. The applause that followed was thunderous recognition of truth finally revealed. Veterans who'd survived because of my protocols, military families who'd been reunited because of my extraction procedures, medical professionals who'd studied my techniques, they finally knew who had kept their loved ones alive. Dad stepped away from the microphone, his presentation forgotten, his reputation crumbling in real time. But for the first time in 8 years, I stood not as a family failure, but as the architect of American combat medicine. Sarah returned to my side, took my hand, and whispered, "Welcome home, General Carter." 10 months after Sarah's anniversary reception revelation, I stood in the Pentagon's Special Operations Medical Command briefing room, preparing for what would become the Carter Family Integration Protocol, a classified program where Sarah would officially join my medical assessment team as a civilian trauma specialist consultant. The irony wasn't lost on me. For 8 years, I'd worked to keep my family separated from my professional world. Now, Sarah's medical expertise and her unique perspective as someone who'd witnessed both sides of my double life had proven invaluable in bridging theoretical combat medicine with real-world hospital trauma care. "Colonel Carter," Major Williams announced, "Dr. Carter has arrived for the strategic briefing." Sarah entered in professional attire, but her demeanor had transformed completely. Gone was the confused sister-in-law who'd once pitied my apparent lack of direction. In its place stood the respectful professional relationship between two medical experts who'd earned mutual trust through shared dedication to saving lives. "Ma'am," she said formally, then smiled. "Ready to revolutionize military trauma medicine?" We'd spent recent months collaborating on something unprecedented, a comprehensive integration of combat medical protocols with civilian emergency procedures. Sarah's hospital experience provided crucial insights into how battlefield innovations could enhance trauma care in domestic medical facilities. Before beginning our briefing, I activated the secure communication system. The screen revealed David calling from his law firm, Michelle from her prosecutor's office, and surprisingly, Dad appearing from his restructured medical practice. "Little sister," David said, grinning through the screen. "Or should I say, Colonel? I'm still adjusting to the fact that my sister has been saving American soldiers while I thought she was struggling with basic employment." The healing with David had been profound. When he learned about the personal sacrifices I'd made to protect our family, including the shadow protection I'd provided for his humanitarian missions, he'd been quiet for hours. Finally, he'd said something that still moved me. You chose to serve in silence while we served in spotlight. Both required courage, but yours required sacrifice. I never understood." Michelle appeared genuinely emotional on screen. After the anniversary reception, she'd spent weeks researching my actual military record through legal channels. "I prosecute people who steal valor," she'd said during one conversation, "but you're the opposite. Someone whose valor was stolen by circumstance and classification." Dad appeared smaller and more humble than I'd ever seen him. After the public revelation, he'd faced immediate professional consequences. Several consulting contracts were terminated when clients realized his expertise was borrowed. But rather than destroying him completely, Sarah and I had worked to find a path that preserved dignity while acknowledging truth. "The new role is challenging," Dad reported quietly. "Instead of claiming credit for combat innovations, I'm focusing on civilian trauma medicine using my actual emergency room experience. Sarah has been helping me understand where military protocols can enhance hospital procedures without compromising either field." More importantly, he'd begun the difficult process of public acknowledgement. "The hardest part," he'd admitted during one painful family conversation, "was realizing I'd spent years worrying about my daughter's future while she was securing other people's futures with skills I could never imagine." Sarah pulled out a leather portfolio. "I've been working with military medical historians to document the real story of battlefield medicine advancement, not the sanitized version that appears in medical journals, but the truth about how life-saving innovations actually develop in combat conditions." The book's working title, David added with a grin, is The Ghost Healer: How America's Most Classified Medical Officer Revolutionized Combat Medicine. I smiled. "How about something simpler? Maybe Service Beyond Recognition, a medical family's hidden story." Because that's what this has always been about. Finding ways to serve something greater than personal achievement or family approval. The briefing that followed was unlike any I'd conducted. Instead of working in isolation, making medical decisions implemented by people I'd never meet, I collaborated with family members who understood both the human cost of combat medicine and the necessity of difficult choices in life or death situations. As we analyzed complex scenarios involving battlefield trauma, civilian emergency response, and family protection protocols, I realized the 8 years of separation hadn't been wasted. Sarah brought hospital perspectives I couldn't gain in combat zones. David offered legal frameworks for medical ethics I'd never considered. Michelle provided prosecutorial insights into medical accountability. Even Dad's emergency room experience offered practical knowledge about trauma care that enhanced our military protocols. We were stronger together than any of us had been apart. When the briefing concluded, Sarah and I walked through Pentagon corridors toward the exit. These halls no longer felt like places where I hid from family. They felt like spaces where I could finally serve alongside them. "You know," Sarah said as we approached the parking area, "I used to think the highest medical honor was saving lives in front of grateful families. Now I think it might be saving lives that nobody knows were in danger." I looked at my sister-in-law, Drive, Sarah Carter, trauma specialist, military consultant, and finally, truly, family, and smiled. That's what real service looks like. My name is Lieutenant Colonel Jessica Carter, and I am no longer a failure. I am simply a woman who found her own way to serve with honor. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.